When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, it was hailed by the Kremlin as one of the greatest triumphs of Vladimir Putin's leadership. Moscow declared the peninsula historically Russian, claiming that the people of Crimea had chosen to join Russia through a controversial referendum. For years, state propaganda painted Crimea as a proud jewel of the Russian Federation, a land of beauty, beaches, and strategic power in the Black Sea. But today, in 2025, that story is collapsing. For the first time since the annexation, Russian citizens living in Crimea are openly voicing their discontent. The once silenced population is now facing electricity shortages, food insecurity, rising prices, and the terrifying reality of drone and missile strikes. Ukraine's successful counteroffensive in the Black Sea has left Russian troops stranded, supply lines crippled, and ordinary people in Crimea living under constant fear. Life under siege. The war has dragged on far longer than anyone in Russia expected. What was once sold as a special military operation has become a full-scale disaster. In Crimea, daily life is almost unrecognizable. Basic goods are scarce, supermarkets often stand half-empty, and black market prices have skyrocketed. Air raid sirens blare constantly. Families are forced into basements and shelters at all hours of the night. Tourism, once the lifeblood of Crimea's economy, is dead. Beaches are empty, hotels abandoned, and businesses shuttered. Russian soldiers behave more like occupiers than protectors. Residents whisper about looting, harassment, and corruption by the very forces that claim to defend them. For many, the dream of being part of Russia has turned into a nightmare. Protests in Sevastopol and Simferopol. Recent footage leaked from Sevastopol shows groups of residents shouting at local officials, demanding answers about why their children have no future. In Simferopol, mothers held silent vigils for young men drafted into the Russian army who never returned. These small acts of defiance may seem insignificant, but in authoritarian Russia, they are explosive. The Kremlin has always portrayed Crimea as loyal. Yet cracks are forming, and Moscow fears that resentment could spread into open rebellion. The growing call for a no-fly zone. One of the loudest demands from civilians is the establishment of a no-fly zone. With Ukrainian drones and missiles pounding Russian bases, and Russian air defenses striking back with reckless abandon, the skies over Crimea have become deadly. Civilians are caught in the middle. Parents refuse to send children to school for fear of air raids. Farmers abandon crops because their fields are within range of missile strikes. Ordinary people, exhausted and traumatized, have begun saying openly, "We don't care if it's Russia or Ukraine anymore. Just stop the bombs." The idea of a no-fly zone is politically explosive. For Ukraine, it would represent an enormous victory, neutralizing Russia's air advantage. For NATO, it would be a massive escalation. But for ordinary Crimeans, it has become a desperate plea for survival. Part 2. The world reacts. Russia's grip on Crimea is slipping. The unrest in Crimea is not going unnoticed. Around the world, politicians, analysts, and military experts are debating whether this could be the moment that Russia finally loses its hold over the peninsula. International pressure mounts. Western governments have long refused to recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea. But until recently, little could be done. Now, with Russia's military overstretched in Ukraine and Crimea itself in chaos, Western leaders are sensing opportunity. The U.S. Congress has openly discussed the idea of supporting a no-fly zone over Crimea, at least partially enforced. Through advanced air defense systems supplied to Ukraine, the European Union is pushing for more sanctions specifically targeting Russian administrators in Crimea. Turkey, controlling the Bosporus and heavily invested in Black Sea security, has begun speaking of Crimea's inevitable liberation. For Putin, this is a nightmare scenario. Losing Crimea would not just be a military defeat, it would be a historic humiliation, one that could bring his political career crashing down. Putin's desperate measures. Inside the Kremlin, panic is spreading. Reports suggest that Putin has ordered mass arrests of suspected traitors in Crimea. Rapid militarization of the peninsula, turning schools, hospitals, and even churches into storage depots for weapons. Propaganda campaigns attempting to frame protests as the work of Ukrainian agents. But these moves are backfiring. The heavier Moscow's hand, the angrier Crimeans become. Even longtime supporters of Russia are beginning to admit, This is not the life we were promised. The turning point. What makes this moment historic is not just the protests, it's the collapse of fear. For years, Crimeans lived in silence, terrified of speaking against Russia. But as the bombs fall and life deteriorates, silence is no longer an option. Ordinary people are saying out loud what the Kremlin fears most. We want peace, not Putin. If Russia can't protect us, maybe Ukraine can. A number-fly zone is the only way to survive. The road ahead. The future of Crimea hangs in the balance. Several scenarios are possible. 1. Russia cracks down harder, silencing protests with violence. This could temporarily suppress dissent but fuel underground resistance. 2. Ukraine escalates its offensive, breaking through Russian defenses and pushing closer to reclaiming Crimea. 3. The West enforces a limited no-fly zone, reshaping the battlefield and signaling the beginning of the end of Russian control. Whatever happens, one fact is clear: Crimea is no longer the safe haven Russia once claimed it to be. Conclusion. Justice in motion. The phrase, "justice has been done," now echoes across Crimea. For years, residents endured promises, propaganda, and oppression. But the reality of war has stripped those illusions bare. The Russian dream has turned into a Russian nightmare, and the people of Crimea are standing at the edge of history. Their voices, demanding peace, demanding dignity, demanding a sky free from bombs, may ultimately determine the fate of the Black Sea, the war in Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin himself.